The Castle of Otranto stood silent under the heavy sky, its ancient towers cloaked in mist, its crumbling stones whispering forgotten prayers to the clouds above. Today was to be a celebration. Young Conrad, the only son of Lord Manfred and Lady Hippolyta, was to marry the beautiful Isabella, a union that would secure Manfred's claim over Otranto for generations to come. The castle's bells tolled a deep, thunderous sound. The halls were dressed in dark banners and tattered flags, and the courtiers gathered nervously, whispering behind gloved hands. Conrad, pale and thin, dressed in ceremonial robes too large for his frail frame, walked slowly toward the castle chapel where the ceremony would be held. All eyes were on him. All breath seemed held. The storm clouds above grumbled low and ominous. And then, without warning, a deafening crash echoed through the castle. A terrible roar, like the heavens themselves breaking apart. From the highest tower, something enormous fell. A monstrous, gleaming object larger than any man. It struck Conrad with a force that shattered the stones beneath him. The crowd screamed in horror. When the dust cleared, there, lying in the courtyard, was a colossal helmet made of black iron, inscribed with ancient, indecipherable runes. And beneath it, broken and lifeless, lay Conrad, the heir of Otranto. Panic erupted. Lady Hippolyta fainted dead away. Manfred stood frozen, staring at the ruin before him, his hands trembling not with grief, but with fear. He knew. He had always known. The prophecy was real. The castle and lordship of Otranto shall pass from the present family, when the real owner shall be grown too large to inhabit it. Those old, cursed words now thundered in Manfred's ears. The omen had come, and with it, the end of his house, unless he acted swiftly and ruthlessly. The halls of Otranto were filled with wailing. The servants rushed to cover Conrad's broken body with black cloth, while the nobles whispered of curses and omens, glancing nervously at the skies. But Manfred, lord of the castle, did not mourn. He raged. In the darkness of the castle's great hall, he paced like a caged wolf, his cloak dragging behind him, his dreams, his lineage, his power, all slipping through his fingers like sand. He could not let it happen. Not now. Not ever. And so, in a voice cold and hard as iron, he summoned Isabella. The girl came, trembling, dressed still in her wedding gown, the pale silk now soaked with the misty rain that blew in through the broken walls. She bowed before Manfred, her eyes wide with fear. "My lord, I am sorry for your loss," she whispered. Manfred looked at her, not as a grieving father might look at the fiancée of his dead son, but as a man desperate to escape the jaws of fate. "The marriage must go on," Manfred said. His voice echoed sharply off the stone. "But not between you and Conrad." Isabella froze. She stared at him, her lips parting in confusion and growing horror. "You will marry me," Manfred said, stepping closer. "Tonight, before the sun sets again." The blood drained from Isabella's face. Her knees threatened to buckle. Manfred, old enough to be her father, was seizing her, binding her future to his own crumbling destiny. I cannot," she gasped. "My lord, it would be monstrous." She backed away, her skirts dragging through the puddles on the stone floor. But Manfred's eyes blazed. Desperation had already drowned his reason. "You will obey," he thundered. "It is your duty to this house, to preserve the honor of Otranto." The sound of his voice carried through the castle, through the dark halls, and up the crooked towers. A few servants dared to peek from behind curtains. Others simply fled, not daring to witness the horror unfolding. Isabella bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had to think, had to act. Fast. "Allow me a moment, my lord," she said softly, her voice barely a breath, "to pray for Conrad's soul and for our union." Manfred hesitated. Then, with a grunt, he waved her away toward the private chapel. Isabella turned, walked slowly at first, measured steps, but the moment she passed the chapel's doors, she ran, faster than she had ever moved in her life, through the shadows, through the dripping corridors, down into the secret passages she had once explored as a child. She knew the old stories. She knew the hidden ways. And somewhere, in the labyrinth beneath Otranto, there was a door, a way out, if she could reach it before Manfred realized her trickery. Behind her, the castle itself seemed to awaken. The stones groaned. The torches sputtered. The air grew colder, heavier. It was as if Otranto itself was alive. And it was angry. Far behind, she heard the shout. "Find her! Bring her back!" Manfred's men were coming. The walls of the castle pressed closer, and Isabella ran into the darkness, the ancient blood of Otranto breathing down her neck. Isabella ran. Her bare feet slapped against the cold stones, her gown trailing behind like a pale ghost. The castle twisted around her. Narrow halls turned unfamiliar. Doors she remembered now locked tight. Passages that should have led to safety instead led deeper into darkness. Above her, the storm rumbled. Thunder cracked across the towers. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, groaning with the weight of ancient curses. The Castle of Otranto was no longer a home. It was a maze, a trap, a mouth waiting to close around her. She ducked beneath low arches, brushed past crumbling statues whose hollow eyes seemed to follow her. The torches in the halls flickered wildly as she passed, casting monstrous shadows that twisted and danced. Behind her, the clatter of boots. Manfred's men, hunting her. Closer, faster. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred with tears. She turned a corner and stumbled into a narrow stairway winding downward, into the depths of the castle, into the heart of its secrets. She hesitated, for a heartbeat, a breath. The air down there smelled of earth and damp stone. Old air, air that hadn't been breathed by living lungs for centuries. But the shouts grew louder behind her, and so she plunged into the darkness. The stairway spiraled endlessly, carved crudely into the stone. The walls pressed close. Moisture dripped from the ceiling. The air grew colder with every step. Her foot slipped. She caught herself against the wall, scraping her palms on the jagged rock. Down, down, down. At the bottom of the stair, a low passage stretched out before her, lit only by the dim green glow of fungus clinging to the walls. The floor was uneven, slick with moss and water. The air here whispered, 1,000 soft voices brushing against her ears. Words she couldn't understand. Words she didn't want to understand. She ran again, faster now, driven by terror deeper than she had ever known. And then, a sound, not behind her, ahead, the slow scrape of stone on stone, the creak of rusted iron hinges. A door opening. She froze, pressed herself into a shadow, held her breath. A figure emerged from the misty gloom ahead. Not a soldier, not Manfred, something older, a shape in a long cloak, face hidden beneath a heavy cowl, a shape too large, too heavy, dragging something enormous behind it. As the figure stepped into the green light, Isabella gasped. It was dragging a giant sword, a sword so massive it carved grooves into the stone floor as it moved. And even stranger, the figure's feet did not touch the ground. It floated, barely an inch above the floor. A ghost, or something worse. The cloaked figure turned slowly toward her. Though she could not see its face, she could feel its gaze, cold as the grave, heavy as stone. She fled back the way she came, up the spiraling stair, back toward the distant light, the distant shouting. Behind her, the scraping of the giant sword followed. Not fast, not urgent, just steady, relentless. The castle groaned louder now. The stones trembled beneath her feet. It was as if Otranto itself was waking up, answering the call of ancient blood, of broken oaths. She burst back into the main corridors. A soldier spotted her, shouted. She ducked into a side hall, heart pounding, lungs burning. Another soldier grabbed at her gown. She ripped free, stumbling forward, her mind barely holding on to reason. And then, a miracle, a side door, broken open, a passage beyond, and daylight, gray, misty, rain-soaked daylight. Freedom. Without thinking, she threw herself through the door, into the castle gardens. The cold rain soaked her instantly, blinding her, freezing her. But she was free of the castle's walls. For now, she did not stop running. Through the twisted trees, over the broken paths, into the dark woods beyond the castle. Behind her, the castle loomed against the sky, its towers black against the storm, its windows hollow and watching, its gates slowly closing with a heavy, final groan. But Isabella knew. The castle of Otranto was not done with her yet, nor with Manfred, nor with anyone who bore its cursed blood. Rain lashed the trees. The cold wind howled through the dark forest, and Isabella ran. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest, each breath a dagger in her ribs. Behind her, the black silhouette of Otranto Castle loomed in the storm, its broken towers clawing at the sky. She stumbled through the tangled undergrowth, branches clawing at her gown, mud sucking at her feet. There was no path, only the endless woods, and the ancient stories of what waited there. She didn't know how long she ran. Minutes, hours. The storm blurred everything. The ground tilted downward sharply, a steep, rocky slope hidden under the leaves. She slipped, tumbled, rolled into the dark. When she stopped, she found herself lying in a narrow ravine. The air here was colder, heavy with the scent of wet stone and old earth. Somewhere close, she heard the low, steady roar of underground water, a hidden river, and then, a voice. "Are you hurt, my lady?" She gasped, scrambling backward. From the shadows of the ravine, a figure emerged, a young man, clad in simple hunting leathers, a sword strapped across his back. His face, though shadowed, was striking. Strong features, keen dark eyes that burned with intelligence and something else. Compassion. Who are you? Isabella demanded, her voice shaking. The young man bowed slightly. A friend, if you will let me be, he said. My name is Theodore, a simple peasant, though I know these woods better than most. He extended a hand to her. She hesitated. Every part of her screamed not to trust him, but the roar of the castle's hunt still echoed in her mind. The ghostly figure beneath the castle, the monstrous helmet that crushed Conrad, the desperate, grasping hands of Manfred. She placed her hand in Theodore's. He pulled her gently to her feet. You must be quick, he said. The castle's soldiers will be searching these woods soon enough. She nodded. Together, they moved swiftly along the ravine, sheltered from view by the tangled roots and broken stones. Theodore led confidently, as if he knew every twisted tree, every hidden path. As they moved, Isabella found herself glancing at him. There was something unusual about him, something that didn't fit. His posture was too proud, his voice too measured. He moved not like a peasant, but like someone who had once worn a crown. Why do you help me? She asked finally. Theodore smiled faintly. Because evil must be answered, he said, and the wicked must not have their way, even in a place as cursed as Otranto. Before she could ask more, he held up a hand. Voices, shouts, dogs barking. The castle's hunt had entered the forest. Theodore glanced around quickly, then pointed toward a narrow fissure in the rock wall ahead. There, a hidden place. It leads beneath the castle itself, an old path forgotten by most. Isabella hesitated. Returned toward the castle, toward the place she had just fled in terror? It's the only way, Theodore said, reading her fear. Trust me, it leads to safety. The barking grew louder, closer. Isabella swallowed her fear. She followed him. The passage was narrow and wet, barely tall enough to walk upright. The walls dripped cold water. Roots dangled from the ceiling like skeletal fingers. The air smelled of mold and sorrow. They moved carefully through the darkness. Their footsteps echoed eerily in the damp space. And all the while, Isabella could feel the castle above them, a weight pressing down, an ancient force waking from its long slumber. After what felt like hours, they reached a wider chamber. A forgotten crypt. Broken statues lined the walls. Rusty swords lay scattered among shattered bones. A faded tapestry still clung to the far wall, its image barely visible. A crowned knight, holding a sword aloft, standing over a vanquished tyrant. Theodore paused. He touched the tapestry reverently. There is a story here, he murmured. A bloodline that should have ruled. A legacy stolen. Isabella watched him carefully. There was more to Theodore than he admitted. Much more. Before she could question him, a deep, resonant sound echoed through the crypt. The rumble of shifting stone. The low, mournful groan of a door opening far above. The castle was stirring again. The prophecy was moving closer, and they were standing in the heart of its forgotten power. The crypt shuddered with the deep groans of the castle above. Dust fell from the ceiling. Bones shifted in their graves. The cold mist thickened around their feet. Somewhere far above them, the stones of Otranto whispered secrets too old for living ears. Theodore turned to Isabella, his face grim. We don't have much time, he said. The force is at work here. They are awake again. She studied him carefully, the way he stood, the way he spoke. There was no doubt now. He was not merely a peasant, not merely a hunter. There was royalty in his bones. Even the darkness seemed to shy away from him. "Tell me who you are," Isabella urged. "Truly." Theodore hesitated. For a moment, he looked like he might refuse. But then, the tapestry behind them fluttered, as if some unseen hand brushed against it. The crowned knight seemed to glare down at them both, demanding truth, demanding remembrance. "My father," Theodore said at last, "was once the rightful heir to a noble house, one that ruled Otranto long before Manfred's bloodline ever defiled these stones. Betrayed," he continued, voice bitter, "cast out, forgotten, his name erased from the histories, his birthright stolen by those who wear the crown today." Isabella's heart pounded. The prophecy, the fall of Otranto, the true heir. "And now," Theodore said, "the curse that Manfred tried to suppress is breaking free. The castle itself remembers. It calls to blood, to truth." Lightning cracked outside. The thunder rolled through the very stones beneath their feet. The air grew thicker, charged with ancient power. "But why now?" Isabella asked, her voice small. "Why awaken after all these years?" Theodore's eyes darkened. "Because Manfred, in his desperation, sought to defy the curse. By forcing you into marriage, he thought to trick fate. But fate cannot be tricked, only delayed, and now it demands its price." Another deep groan shook the crypt. From the broken passage they had come through, a cold wind blew, bringing with it the scent of damp stone and something far older, the grave. "We have to move," Theodore said urgently. "The castle is awakening all its ghosts now. It will not let you escape so easily." Isabella nodded, her legs trembling. Together, they crossed the crypt, weaving between the fallen statues and shattered shields. Each step stirred the dust of forgotten battles, the lost cries of warriors who had died believing they defended honor. When they reached the far side, Theodore paused before a great stone door, barely visible behind ivy and decay. "Beyond this lies the heart of the old Otranto," he said, "the sacred ground where the true kings swore their oaths. If I can reach it," he whispered, almost to himself, "perhaps I can awaken the old powers. Perhaps I can set things right." Isabella shivered. The air here was thick with fate, with choices that could not be undone. She placed a hand on the cold stone. "I will help you," she said, "whatever it takes." For a moment, Theodore simply looked at her, surprised, grateful. Then he pushed against the door with all his strength. It groaned in protest. Cracks spread through the ancient stone. Dust rained down. With a final heave, the door crumbled inward. Beyond it yawned a wide, dark tunnel, a path leading even deeper into the earth, even deeper into the secrets buried beneath Otranto. And as they stepped forward, the castle moaned behind them, a sound like mourning, a sound like warning, for ahead of them lay the truth, and the reckoning. The tunnel swallowed them whole. The air inside was thicker than before, damp, cold, alive with the pulse of ancient forces. Their footsteps echoed along the stone walls, whispering back at them in voices they didn't recognize. Each step forward felt like stepping deeper into another time, another world, a place where the past had never died, only waited. Theodore moved ahead of Isabella, his torch barely holding back the crushing darkness. The carved walls around them grew more intricate. Scenes of crowned kings, fallen warriors, a great castle rising from the bones of the earth. But as they continued, the images changed. The kings grew twisted, their faces blurred, their crowns shattered. The castle crumbled, the bones rose. The final carvings showed a great helmet, a monstrous iron crown, falling from the heavens, crushing a line of kings into the dust. The prophecy, Isabella breathed. Theodore nodded grimly. It was always written, always waiting. The tunnel opened at last into a vast underground chamber. The ceiling arched high above, lost in darkness. In the center of the room stood a single object, an altar carved from black stone. Upon it rested a massive sword, ancient, beautiful, terrible. Its blade was inscribed with runes that glowed faintly in the darkness. As they approached, the very air seemed to hum. The torch flickered wildly, struggling against an unseen wind. Theodore stepped toward the altar, drawn as if by invisible hands. "What is this place?" Isabella whispered. "The heart of Otranto," Theodore said. "The place where the true kings bound their blood to the land, where the curse was sealed." He reached for the sword. The moment his fingers touched the hilt, the chamber shook. The earth trembled. A deep, resonant moan rose from the stones themselves. The sword flared with blinding white light. Images flooded Isabella's mind. A noble king betrayed by his brother. An ancient oath broken in greed. A curse placed not by God, but by the earth itself. The rightful bloodline scattered, hidden, forgotten. Until now. Until Theodore. The light dimmed. Theodore staggered back, gasping. The sword remained in his hands, the runes now burning brightly along its length. "It accepts me," he whispered. "The castle knows me." Above them, deep within the heart of the ancient stones, something stirred, something vast, something angry. The castle's great towers shuddered in the storm. The windows howled with ghostly screams. Doors slammed on their own. The very bones of Otranto cried out. Far away, back in the halls of the castle, Manfred felt a shift. He dropped the goblet from his hand, the wine staining the stone floor like blood. He knew. The heir had come. The curse had awakened. The walls he had built with blood and deceit could not hold it back any longer. He must be stopped, Manfred snarled, his voice breaking with panic. At any cost. Meanwhile, deep beneath the castle, Theodore turned to Isabella. His eyes burned now, with power, with destiny, with the weight of 1,000 forgotten ancestors. "It's time to end this," he said, once and for all. Above them, the castle roared with fury. The rain hammered the stones. The mist thickened into hands. The past had awoken, and it was hungry. The halls of Otranto shook. Tapestries tore themselves from the walls. Ancient suits of armor clattered to the ground. The floors cracked under unseen pressure. The storm outside raged like a living thing, and in the great hall, under the shattered banners of his once proud house, Manfred stood alone, broken, terrified, raging against the inevitable. He had spent his life running from prophecy, killing for it, lying for it, stealing thrones and twisting bloodlines to keep his power. And still, the curse had come. Still, the castle had turned against him. "No," Manfred muttered, pacing madly. "I will not lose. Not when victory is so close." He summoned the last of his guards, a pitiful, fearful handful of men, their faces pale, their hands trembling. Even they felt it now. The castle did not belong to Manfred anymore. "Seal the gates," Manfred barked. "Find a girl. Find the boy. Kill them both if you must." His voice cracked. No one moved. "Now," he roared, and the guards scattered, more from fear of Manfred than loyalty to him. In the throne room, Manfred threw himself into the ancient chair of kings, a relic older than his stolen bloodline. The iron felt cold and wrong beneath him. Above his head, the great iron helmet, or what was left of it, still hung from the shattered rafters, casting long, broken shadows. Manfred pressed his face into his hands. He could feel the castle judging him. He could hear the whispers of the dead kings, whose legacy he had stolen. Suddenly, a noise. Not the storm, not the crumbling stones, but footsteps. Sure, steady. He looked up. There, at the far end of the hall, stood Theodore, the rightful heir, the sword of the old kings burning bright in his hand, and beside him, Isabella, no longer the frightened girl he had tried to possess, but a fierce, unyielding force standing by the true heir. Manfred rose to his feet, rage twisting his face. "You will not take this from me," he shouted. "It is mine. It was always mine." Theodore said nothing. He simply raised the sword. The runes blazed like fire. The storm crashed against the walls. The floor cracked wider. The pillars shivered. Manfred drew his own blade, an ancient weapon, rusted with time and treachery. He charged at Theodore, a scream tearing from his throat. The clash echoed like thunder in the great hall. Steel rang against steel. Manfred fought with the desperation of a cornered animal. Wild, vicious, Theodore fought with calm purpose. Every strike was measured, every step controlled. The castle itself seemed to watch. The portraits on the walls wept tears of blood. The shattered statues groaned in their broken slumber. Isabella stood at the foot of the dais, watching, praying, hoping. Manfred drove Theodore back, blow after blow. The old lord fought like a man who knew he had nothing left to lose. But strength born of fear could not match destiny, could not match truth. With a final cry, Theodore disarmed him. Manfred's sword clattered across the stone floor. He stumbled backward, falling to his knees. "Mercy," he gasped. "I only wanted to save my house." Theodore stood over him, the sword raised. But he hesitated. "Your house was built on stolen blood," he said quietly. "It was doomed from the moment you betrayed the true line." He lowered the sword. "The castle will judge you, not I." As if on cue, the ground beneath Manfred cracked open. A yawning fissure split the floor, widening with a terrible roar. Manfred screamed, a high, broken sound, as the stones gave way beneath him. He fell into the darkness below, swallowed by the castle he had tried to command. The ground sealed behind him with a shuddering finality. The storm outside began to break. The wind softened. The rain slowed to a whisper. Isabella ran to Theodore. He turned to her, bloodied, bruised, but alive. The castle moaned once more, a long, deep sigh, as if exhaling centuries of sorrow. The true heir had returned. The curse had been answered, but not without cost. The storm outside faded to a dull murmur. The Castle of Otranto stood battered and broken, its ancient stones slick with rain, its towers leaning as if bowing to an unseen king. Inside the great hall, all was still. Only the hollow echo of falling water broke the silence. Theodore stood in the center of the ruined throne room, the old sword still in his hand. Isabella stood beside him, her gown torn and soaked, but her spirit unbroken. They had survived, but survival was not the same as victory. Slowly, carefully, Theodore knelt. He placed the ancient sword across his knees, bowing his head in reverence. The castle groaned above him, not in anger now, but almost in approval. "It is done," Isabella whispered. Theodore looked up at her, his face shadowed by grief and duty. "It is not enough to defeat a tyrant," he said softly. "We must also rebuild what was lost." From the shadows at the edges of the hall, the few remaining servants of Otranto crept forward, eyes wide, faces pale. They looked not at the ruins, nor at the broken throne. They looked at Theodore, at the sword across his knees, at the blood in his veins, and they knelt, one by one, bowing to the true heir of Otranto. But Theodore's heart was heavy. Victory carried its own sorrow. The castle was still full of ghosts, still full of memories that could not be undone, still full of blood that cried out from the stones. "I never sought a crown," Theodore said quietly. "And yet," Isabella replied, her voice steady, "perhaps that is why you are worthy of it." Together they rose. Theodore turned to the broken doors of the throne room. Beyond them, the first weak light of dawn crept over the ruins. The mist was lifting. The darkness was retreating. But Otranto would never be the same. It would always bear the scars of its betrayal, the memories of its curse. As they stepped into the morning light, the people of the village began to gather at the foot of the castle. Old men, children, mothers with babes in arms, all drawn by the strange stillness, the broken storm, the whisper of a new beginning. Theodore lifted the sword high, not in conquest, not in pride, but in promise. "The blood of Otranto runs true once more," he declared. "But it shall not be ruled by fear. It shall not be built on betrayal. Today, Otranto begins again." A murmur rose from the crowd. Hope, something the castle had not seen in generations. Isabella stood at his side, her heart steady, her gaze fixed on the future. They had survived the darkness, but they would never forget it. They would honor the dead. They would remember the price. And from the highest tower, the great iron helmet, the symbol of the curse, cracked in two. It fell, shattering on the stones below, its final echo rolling through the hills like a broken sigh. The past was done. The future was beginning. The light of morning crept weakly across the broken stones of Otranto. The rain had ceased. The mist had begun to lift, but the air still felt heavy, incomplete, as if something ancient still lingered, waiting to be finished. Theodore knew it, felt it deep in his bones. Victory alone was not enough. The curse that had haunted Otranto for generations had been broken, but not yet laid to rest. He stood in the ruined courtyard, the sword of the true kings across his back. The gathered villagers watched in hushed silence. At his side, Isabella. Her presence steadied him, grounded him in the living world. "There's an oath," Theodore said to the people, his voice carrying across the stones. "A vow made by the first kings of Otranto. It was broken by betrayal. Now it must be renewed, sealed anew by blood, by stone, by memory. The villagers fell to their knees. Even the broken walls of the castle seemed to lean forward, listening, waiting. Isabella placed her hand gently on Theodore's. "You are ready," she whispered. He nodded, though his heart was heavy with the weight of all who had died, all who had suffered. He knew he had no choice. Otranto needed a protector, not a tyrant, a true heir, a true guardian. In the center of the courtyard, beneath the shattered iron helmet, lay an ancient stone, the stone of oaths, carved by hands long dead, inscribed with runes so old they barely breathed. The place where kings had once sworn loyalty to the land itself. Theodore approached it slowly. Each step echoed like a heartbeat in the cold morning air. He drew the ancient sword. The runes along its blade shimmered faintly, reacting to the closeness of the sacred stone. He knelt before it, lowered the blade until it rested across the worn markings, closed his eyes, and spoke the words that rose not from his mind, but from the deep, forgotten places in his blood. "I swear by stone and sky, by blood and memory, by those who came before and those who shall come after. Otranto shall be ruled by justice, not greed, by honor, not fear, by truth, not silence. I bind my life to this land, and in doing so, bind its spirit to peace once more." The stone pulsed faintly under his hands. The earth rumbled softly beneath his knees. Above them, the last tattered banners hanging from the broken towers stirred, as if caught by an invisible breath. When Theodore opened his eyes, the sword blazed with pure light. It was done. The curse, the sorrow, the ancient hunger, bound, sealed, laid to rest. The villagers rose slowly, faces wet with tears. They knew. They had seen history, real history, being written before them. Theodore stood, his face calm, his eyes fierce. He turned to Isabella. For a moment, there was only silence between them, and then, a soft smile, a future unspoken, but understood. The Castle of Otranto groaned once more, not in pain this time, in relief, in peace. The stones settled, the air warmed, the dark weight that had pressed upon this place for centuries lifted at last. But Theodore knew, the memory would remain. The past would not be forgotten. It would be honored. Otranto had a true ruler once more, and the land itself, for the first time in centuries, breathed freely again. The sun rose slowly over the hills, its golden light bathing the battered towers of Otranto. Where once the castle had brooded under heavy clouds, it now gleamed faintly in the soft morning mist. The stones, though cracked and worn, seemed lighter somehow, as if the very soul of the place had been lifted from centuries of sorrow. In the courtyard, the people gathered, farmers, servants, smiths, children. They stood in silent awe, watching Theodore and Isabella emerge from the broken archway, side by side, bound not by fear, but by choice, by hope. Theodore raised the ancient sword one final time, its runes now dimming, settling into quiet rest. The weapon had served its purpose. Its power was no longer needed. The curse had been fulfilled, the debt repaid. He drove the blade into the earth at the foot of the old stone of oaths. A new monument, a new memory, a new beginning. The people cheered, not the wild, roaring cheer of conquest, but a quiet, reverent sound, a sound of belonging, of healing. Isabella stood beside him, her face turned to the rising sun, no longer a pawn to be married off, no longer a prize to be claimed. She was her own future now, and she chose to walk it alongside the true heir of Otranto. The old walls of the castle whispered gently, echoing the names of those who had been lost. Conrad, the ancient kings, the countless souls who had suffered under the curse. They would not be forgotten. Their memories would live on, carried in the stones, carried in the blood, carried in the hearts of the people. Theodore turned to Isabella. In the soft morning light, he took her hand. No grand declarations, no demands, only a promise, silent and enduring, a future forged not by fate, but by choice. And as the sun climbed higher, its warmth touching every broken corner of the castle, the mist finally lifted. Otranto was free, at last, somewhere deep within the oldest stones, where the roots of the earth tangled with memory and time. A voice whispered, "Remember what was lost, honor what remains, and build what is to come." The story of Otranto would not end in sorrow. It would begin again, in hope.